The word epic is a word that the internet has just plain ruined. Just one of the many bastardizations of a previously useful word. But then again, if you have even the most basic knowledge of linguistics, you really should have seen this coming. Language changes over time, so before the word epic became a piece of outdated slang that sits alongside other words such as tubular and bodacious, the dictionary definition of the word epic came to describe a long narrative poem in elevated style recounting the deeds of an important hero, whether they be the subjects of history or legend. This is the genre that encompasses the oldest pieces of literature that we still read today, whether they be from ancient Sumeria, ancient Greece, ancient Mali, China, all stories passed down for millennia because they were these important tales that gave entire civilizations their own cultural identity. As time passed, the word epic soon became a descriptor, and a very useful one at that. It would be used to describe works of art that felt like the classical epics, works that are enormous in scope, following a protagonist or group of protagonists who must commit extraordinary deeds in their quest to achieve a singular goal. Said deeds will usually be a part of multiple, usually separate, adventures that the heroes have to complete in order to achieve said goal. This has been useful in categorizing works of art that feel big, from literature to film to video games to anime. But the word epic can easily become so synonymous with big, expensive, set-piece-laden productions that it's no wonder that the word became so watered down for the past few years. Works that are considered epics are not big because of their budgets, but because they need to be big in order to properly convey big ideas and big visions on a big scale. For instance, I would say Lord of the Rings meets a lot more of the criteria of being an epic work than, say, Avengers Endgame. Which brings us to anime. Since anime does almost everything on a grander scale by default, it makes it a lot harder to figure out what makes an anime an epic anime. Works such as Legends of the Galactic Heroes, Berserk, and Tengen Toppa Gurren Lagann definitely fit the criteria because of their grand scale of both their setting and stories. But with others, it's a little trickier. Naruto, for instance, could be considered an epic as it involves a young hero embroiled in a grand world-changing conflict, but because the scale and thematic qualities feel inconsistent, it's hard to classify it as an epic. Compare this to One Piece, where the singular goal is consistent, the themes are clear, and the story being a series of adventures that grow in scale and build on top of each other to help our heroes reach their ultimate goal of finding the One Piece. It fits a far more traditional definition of an epic story. So why did I talk about all that? Well, considering this video is my second anniversary, yay me, I feel like I should commemorate this milestone by talking about an appropriately epic anime. And not just any epic anime, of course. An epic anime that also fits the criteria of being a forgotten retro classic.
The third energy revolution is ushered in by the invention of the Shizuma Drive. But lurking in the shadows cast by the brilliance of our newfound hope, two great powers clash. Big Fire, a secret organization bent on total world domination.
Hail, Big Fire! Allegiance or death!
But despair not. To defend us from the threat they pose, the international police organization's mighty experts of justice have been formed, comprised of members from around the globe. Fighting by their side is the greatest robot on the planet, Giant Robo, commanded solely by one young man, Daisaku Kusama.
Crush them! Go, Giant Robo!
Kyoto ビデオ
Mitsuteru Yokoyama was born on June 18, 1934 in Kobe, Japan. Most of his boyhood was spent during World War II, and at one point he had to evacuate with his family to escape the bombings. When his family returned home after the war, he found his hometown entirely reduced to ash by American B-29 bombers. It was here, he said, that he became astonished by the terrifying destructive power of weapons. When he entered high school, Yokoyama's life was changed when he began reading Osamu Tezuka's Metropolis. It was that manga that inspired him to become a manga artist. He began his career in earnest from that day forward, spending most of his time in high school making 4-panel comics for his school newspaper. After graduating high school, he was able to net himself a job at one of Japan's most prestigious banking companies. He quit after 5 months when he realized he wouldn't have time to draw manga. Supporting himself by working in a publicity department for a movie studio, Yokoyama began producing manga at a breakneck pace for both young boys and young girls publications. But while his manga got the attention of other artists, including Tezuka himself, it wasn't until 1956 that Yokoyama got what many would consider his big break when he published Tetsujin 28 Go. Or if you're an American boomer who grew up in the 60s, Tetsujin 28 Go tells the story of Shotaro Kaneda and his titular robot. Originally a weapon built by the Japanese army to defeat allied forces, Tetsujin is a robotic weapon that Kaneda, a boy detective, can control in order to fight against crime and the forces of evil. Tetsujin 28 Go holds an important place in anime and manga history, because it was not only hugely influential, but also because it began the entire mecha genre of anime and manga. The manga was hugely successful, and allowed Yokoyama to work in manga full-time. Throughout the 60s and 70s, he ended up producing numerous noteworthy manga titles such as Iga no Kagemaru, which is credited for starting a ninja boom in manga, Sally the Witch, which is credited for creating the entire magical girl genre of anime and manga, and numerous manga adaptations of classic Chinese literature such as Water Margin and Romance of the Three Kingdoms. Tragically, on April 15, 2004, Mitsuteru Yokoyama would end up passing away due to injuries sustained in a house fire. He was 69 years old. Yokoyama was a highly influential figure in the manga industry, possibly second only to Tezuka himself. He has earned countless praise from other manga legends such as Hirohiko Araki, Katsuhiro Otomo, and Naoki Urasawa. The anime industry knew that Yokoyama was a very important figure and wanted to capitalize on that legacy. In 1990, producer Yasuhiro Yamaki approached anime director and screenwriter Yasuhiro Imagawa to see if he would be interested in doing an anime adaptation of one of Yokoyama's works, a 1967 manga title of his called Giant Robo. While the manga title was short-lived, only lasting 3 volumes, it was popular enough to get a live-action TV show that same year, so it definitely still had name recognition at the time. Imagawa's forte up to that point was mecha anime, having done storyboards for numerous popular mecha series of the 1980s. He was also a huge fanboy of super robot anime and manga, especially Yokoyama's. So to say that he jumped at the chance would be an understatement. However, no sooner did pre-production start that he and his team hit a roadblock. It turns out that thanks to some complicated rights issues, Imagawa would not be able to use any of the supporting cast of either the manga or the live-action series. But this issue ended up turning into a blessing. With Yokoyama's support, Imagawa instead populated the world of Giant Robo with characters from the artist's entire body of work. This not only helped create an entirely new storyline, but helped transform what would have been a simple adaptation into a large-scale tribute to a man and his entire creative canon.
Robo strike!
It can't be!
Ginrei! Tetsuku! You have to hold on tight, alright?
Hey, that's the Sakukusama!
And that makes this Giant Robo! Robo, begin a rapid ascent!
Giant Robo, or as it's known by its full title, Giant Robo: The Day the Earth Stood Still, is a 7-episode OVA series that ran from July 22nd, 1992 to January 25th, 1998. Taking place in a retro-futurist society, humanity has solved the energy crisis with the advent of the Shizuma drive system, a source of energy that is non-polluting and completely recyclable. But as humanity enjoys this bright new future, a secret war rages on between two groups in the shadows. On one side is the evil secret society known as Big Fire, an antagonistic group who seeks world domination through giant robots, superpowered human beings, and foot soldiers in blackface. On the other side, you have the International Police Organization, a secret organization formed to take down Big Fire, working in the shadows and using espionage to ensure they never go into an all-out open warfare. On the front lines are a group of special agents called the Experts of Justice, a group of people with exceptional skills and powers that include Buddhist monks, big bruisers, and big blue buff as hell ladies. Fighting alongside the experts is 12-year-old Daisaku Kusama, a young boy who commands the towering titular Giant Robo. Originally a weapon for Big Fire, it has instead found its way to Daisaku, and is now the IPO's most efficient and deadliest weapon. The story of the OVA focuses on Big Fire trying to capture the creator of the energy source, Professor Shizuma. What they want with him or the black attaché case he is carrying with him is unknown. What we do know is that it ultimately might be connected to the resurfacing of Professor Shizuma's old colleague, Professor Franken von Volger. Von Volger was once a respected professor, but is now seen as the mad scientist who caused the tragedy of Bashtarli, a horrific accident that, while it led to the invention of the Shizuma drive, it also destroyed nearly every source of energy on the planet Earth. Killing 2/3 of the Earth's population, survivors have remembered it as the day the Earth stood still. Von Volker desires nothing more than to destroy the singular energy source the world depends on and make the world stand still once again in a beautiful night. It's up to Daisaku and the rest of the experts to protect Professor Shizuma and put a stop to Von Volker and the rest of Big Fire. Except it's rarely that simple, and what follows is a tale full of loss, sacrifice, deceit, and confronting the sins of one's past. Giant Robo is an anime I would definitely call a forgotten classic. I'm old enough to remember a time where people on the internet would laud this OVA series as a prime example of its genre, to the point where people would say that this should have been the definitive mecha classic of the 90s and not Evangelion. But, like so many classics, it ended up being lost in the shuffle of other classics, and just frankly fell by the wayside. Not helped by the DVDs being very much out of print for a full decade, before being recently rescued by our good old friends down at Discotheque. And boy, do I have a lot to say about this anime. When I chose this anime as my second anniversary milestone, I had no idea what to think about it before going into it. All I knew is that it was considered a big anime, both in scale and in story. So when I finally sat down and watched this anime, it blew me away. I don't think I've ever felt this way about an anime for a long time. Giant Robo is an epic anime in the most classic sense of the word. And I'm going to tell you right here, right now, why I think this anime is such a masterpiece on a massive scale. Now, I could talk about the animation of Giant Robo all day, because this may come to a shock to some people, but it's really damn good. Not only is the animation amazing, but it's just consistently amazing. Just non-stop sakuga from the first to last episode. It's no wonder why this anime took around 5.5 years to release. They needed all the time and budget to deliver such a visually stunning animated experience. But just focusing on the animation would be missing the big picture, and I mean big picture. It's thanks to Giant Robo's direction and presentation that not only does the animation always look amazing, but it makes every scene in this anime feel positively gigantic. There is not a single scene in this anime that feels half-assed from a directorial standpoint. Everything from the way these scenes are animated, to the way they are blocked, to the way they are shot is done to deliberately maximize the scene's mood and tone. So let's say if you have a scene that calls for 2 new characters and their respective powers to be introduced in order for them to come to our hero's rescue, it doesn't just drop them into the scene, it instead does something like this.
Justice will prevail! 16 in the heavens, 8 on the earth! UFO to be!
A good example would be Robo's entrance. It's a perfect example of how to establish your main character along with his pet weapon of mass destruction. Robo is introduced to us by a giant metal fist, punching its way out of the hull of a ship to safely catch fellow experts Genrei and Tetsugi with one hand while punching the Big Fire robot that's pursuing them with the other. And by punch, I mean punch so hard it sends the robot flying across a couple of city blocks. We then get a shot of Robo's massive silhouette in the ensuing cloud of dust, followed by the shot of the city where all we hear are the sounds of its earth-shattering footsteps. This is then followed by a short montage showcasing the power of those footsteps. We get a low-angle shot of Robo as it inches closer to the camera, its upper body shrouded in intimidating shadow to emphasize its terrifying majesty. And as the machine's shadow completely envelops the hapless Big Fire Mook, debris falls away to fully reveal both Daisaku and Big Robo, who immediately make short work of the goon. It's just the perfect introduction to the anime, and it gets even better when you remember the scene before that was an extended fistfight on top of a speeding bullet train. Another way Giant Robo makes itself feel big is through its soundtrack. Composer Masamichi Amano utilized the Warsaw Philharmonic Orchestra to craft a beautifully operatic score for the OVA. And that's just not another one of my hyperbolic adjectives. I mean, this sound is full of samples of actual operatic deep cuts. In episode 1, when the entire city of Paris is getting destroyed, you hear a piece that involves Latin chanting. You might see that as cliche until you realize that chanting is actually a 12th century hymn centered around the Christian Judgment Day. Then there's the leitmotif for the tragedy of Bashitare, the event that kicks off the plot in motion. It's an actual aria created by 19th century Italian composer Gaetano Donizetti. Its full title embodying one of the themes of Giant Robo, the sorrow of others not understanding your true feelings. The importance of sound extends to the vocal performances. Both Japanese and English voice actors give it their all when delivering the lines, whether they be screaming passionately to the heavens,
Now, Giant Robo, strike them down!
Crush them, Uranus!
monologuing evilly to themselves,
Only then could I have my revenge against a world who hid its dirty little secrets under a veil of hypocrisy.
or just having an emotional heart-to-heart with one another.
But I'll tell you what I'm not gonna let happen, and that's watch that kid grow up to be another crooked adult who abuses his power.
Yeah, but big brother, before I was his age, I had already killed a man.
By the way, if you're gonna watch this in English, be prepared to hear a lot of Dragon Ball and Sonic voice actors.
Come and get me! I've got what you're looking for right here! You better hang on for your life, old man!
You fully succumb to the influences of my Taoist sorcery, and once my enchantment has taken hold, even a member of the Magnificent Ten would find it near impossible to escape its grasp.
All right, let's deliver some justice.
We will deal with the recovery of the third case at a later time. Let us for now proceed with the Still Earth operation, as scheduled.
A lot of care went into crafting the world of Giant Robo, especially in regards to having the designs of the robots and characters fit the world they inhabit. Yokoyama was pretty much the first true mecha designer, so it's obvious his designs carry a lot of the Tezuka influence of the 50s and 60s. How do you put these designs in a more modern context without them looking too dated? Easy. You create a retro-futurist world where the designs of the robots do not feel out of place at all. The result is a very late 50s, early 60s vision of the future, equal parts diesel punk and ray gun gothic in aesthetic, and able to show the audience how the Shizuma drive system of energy completely shaped all infrastructure and engineering in the matter of a decade. The world's aesthetic also takes a lot of cues from medieval Japan and China, which helps makes the fact that you got samurai and Wulin soldiers roaming around the place a little more believable. Populating the cast with XPs from all walks of Yokoyama's canon was a daring decision considering the scope of his work. Not only do you have Daisaku and Robo, who themselves are XPs of Kaneda and Tetsujin, but you also got characters such as Genrei, who exists as a character in the Babel 2 sequel Sononawa 101. Most of the experts who work with the IPO are based off the cast of Yokoyama's adaptation of the Chinese classic Water Margin. Alberto the Impact and his manservant Ivan were characters in the manga Mars. One of the evil Magnificent 10 is a villainous interpretation of one of Yokoyama's most recognizable heroes, Masked Ninja Akakage. And then there's the character who has the name Sunny the Magician. Yeah. It all goes towards not just populating a world with tributes and references to a single creator's work, but also making the entire cast so full of these broken, superpowered individuals that everyone has the potential to get an awesome moment, underlining why Giant Robo is such a big anime. You really pay attention when even the villain's Weasley manservant is shown to be a credible threat because his limo can transform into a giant, heavily fortified robot that can crush mountains. But what really impressed me was how the story of Giant Robo was structured. Okay, so has anyone seen the film The Adventures of Buckaroo Banzai Across the 8th Dimension? Well, to the few dozens of you who just raised their hands, it's kinda like that. So for those of you who don't know, in short, Buckaroo Banzai is full of these annotations, callbacks, and references to past events in the Buckaroo Banzai universe. The same universe that we, the audience, haven't seen in full.
You're Pecos. Pecos in Tibet. Name's Reno. Reno.
To put it like this, it's like watching part 5 of a movie series without seeing the other 4 parts. The other 4 parts that don't exist.
Why is there a watermelon there?
I'll tell you later.
This is just a short oversimplification though, so if you want to know more about that film structure, just check out Kyle Calgren's video on it in the description below. He goes into more detail if you're still confused. Giant Robo does something similar. Imagawa intended for the OVA to represent the penultimate arc of a grand saga that we, the audience, have not seen and maybe will never get to see. The OVA even ends similar to Buckaroo Banzai by having a sneak preview of the next adventure, a final unwritten chapter that is entirely left up to our imaginations. The first episode practically throws you into this world, almost expecting you to know who these characters are. These brand new characters that you have no prior knowledge of. These characters who are commenting on past adventures and lessons that they may have learned along the way. Entire story arcs that might as well just be lost episodes.
No matter what happens to me out there, promise me you won't use your powers!
Not only will you die for what you did to Servetia Phantasm, but you will suffer for what you did to my eye.
But it works. Aside from a few scenes of awkward exposition in the beginning, you really feel like you know who all these characters are within the first minute of meeting them. So when they make callbacks or references to past events, it feels like little miniature revelations that help us understand these characters more. It's just a great way to tell the story of Giant Robo because it's a story that starts out simple enough, but builds in complexity that, by the end, you feel like you've been taken on a narrative roller coaster. But before we go into detail about all of that, I should warn you that I will be talking massive spoilers, so you know the drill. We'll continue after this short break. Imagawa was the perfect choice to direct and co-write Giant Robo. As I stated before, he is not only a huge fan of Yokoyama's oeuvre, but also the type of old-school bombastic giant robot shows of the 60s and 70s. Stories of good versus evil, light side versus dark side, easily defined black and white morality. Because he knows these stories he grew up on inside and out, he also knows how to play with the tropes associated with those stories. After all, one has to know the rules in order to properly break them. The idea of subverting expectations has definitely degraded over the past couple of years, but I think it works here for Giant Robo. In fact, I think subverting might be the wrong word here. Playing with expectations is more like it. From the outset, Giant Robo is set up like a love letter to the golden age of giant robot shows, a clash between the forces of good and evil on a grander scale. And ultimately, it still is that, but not in a typical way. You see, kids, Giant Robo is a story with a lot of layers! While it may start out as an epic conflict between a wholly good organization of justice and an evil secret society bent on world domination, it begins to get a lot more complex as the story goes on. Let's start with the characters. Going back to those miniature revelations I was talking about earlier, they exist not just to get the audience up to speed, but also provide depth to these characters, even if those moments only last for a split second. Daisaku, for instance, definitely gives off the vibes of a super idealistic kid hero who, as long as he has Robo on his side, can face off against any foe.
Even if something does go wrong with this plan, we still have Giant Robo. The professor said so. He said that with Giant Robo we can defeat them.
But even in the first episode, it's revealed that he not only is an orphan, but a young kid who had to assume adult responsibilities beyond his control. And as his idealism gets broken down throughout the series, it's clear that he is still internally grappling with that situation. But another good character who takes us on a journey of discovering who they really are is Tetsugyu, the Experts of Justice resident bruiser. When we first meet Tetsugyu, you get the feeling that he's just the comic relief, who has this sort of cute, one-sided rivalry with Daisaku over him constantly rescuing him and getting attention from his crush Genrei.
Besides, he can't. Daisaku and I have a date planned this evening.
Big laughs, right? No, he truly resents Daisaku from the bottom of his heart, seeing him as an immature brat who didn't earn his way to the Experts of Justice and only just got there because he inherited a big war machine.
He snatches up our case and hands it over to the commander like he saved the day! Oh, it's just not right. A lot of men died to get that case back. So you tell me, is it fair to them?
But once the big bad's plan starts going down, Daisaku and Tetsugyu are tasked to stay behind and seal up Robo so it doesn't fall into the hands of the enemy. Tetsugyu decides to let Daisaku and Robo disobey orders and assist them in heading out onto the battlefield. So I guess he's over his hatred, right? No, he only did that for Daisaku because he knew he would be sending him into a battle that he could not possibly win, hoping to destroy Robo and break Daisaku's spirit. It's only in the aftermath when he sees how Daisaku mourns over the sacrifice of his comrades just so he and Robo could form a retreat that Tetsugyu realizes he's been a petty asshole.
When I saw you so brokenhearted after Robo fell, I realized something. I wasn't seeing your pain. Instead, I saw the sadness within myself. It reminded me of the first time I ever killed someone. My father, killed by my own hand!
In the end, he sacrifices himself to save Daisaku because he realizes that they are almost one and the same. But he turns out fine, even helps Daisaku in the final battle to show that they are totally cool with each other now. But that brings up another important point: sacrifice. A big theme of Giant Robo is the theme of sacrifice. Tetsugyu is an exception rather than a rule. He sacrifices himself, but ultimately comes out okay. For other members of the Experts of Justice, their sacrifices are far greater. Members Taiso and later his wife Yoshi end up sacrificing themselves just to ensure other members of the team, namely Daisaku and Robo, can get away safely. Genrei was gifted with an exceptionally powerful ability to teleport anywhere, but at the cost of sacrificing her very existence. Even those who still make it through the whole anime alive are still willing to pay the ultimate price so that others may live, such as IPO Chief Chujo, who is fully prepared to unleash a dangerous forbidden technique that is implied to be fatal, all just to ensure that his men can retreat safe and alive.
But Commander, what about you?
I'm gonna fight.
You can't! Are you sure?
Get away from me as far and as fast as you can.
But it's not just heroic sacrifices, there's also the sacrifices others make by their own actions, intentionally or unintentionally. One of the big reveals of this anime involves the tragedy of Bashtarle not being as we know it. It turns out that the incident was caused by Professor Shizuma and his colleagues trying to create the Shizuma drive when the calculations weren't 100% there yet. It was thanks to Professor Von Volker sacrificing himself that allowed the scientists to escape and led to the creation of the Shizuma drive. And yet, Von Volker survived and was able to see the true breadth of his sacrifice, that he would go down in history as a madman whose monstrous actions caused the world to stand still. But the best examination of the themes comes from the ultimate big bad, Genya. It's revealed that Von Volker has long been dead, but his son lives on and is willing to commit atrocities in his name.
I will make the earth stand still. I will recreate the tragedy of Bashtarl. Mankind has chosen to be blind to the truth, and I will make them see. A world under the control of such hypocrites is a world I would gladly bring to an end.
Interpreting his father's final words as a call for vengeance, Genya is fully prepared to sacrifice everything to carry out what he sees as his father's last wishes. From his connections in Big Fire, to any future he may have still built as a good person, to even his last remaining blood relative, his sister, Genrei.
They can't comprehend the beauty of this gift I have sacrificed myself to give them. Though they chose not to see, I will make them remember the real night.
All of those sacrifices proved to be in vain, however. By the end, he stands amongst the destruction he wrought upon the world, being proven wrong by the true last words of his father. But really, at its core, Giant Robo is ultimately an anime about good versus evil, but not in a traditional sense. The visual language of the OVA relies heavily on the contrast between light and dark, heavy shadows, intense lighting effects, scenes that contrast between the two, shots that will focus on bright lights shining against a blackened night sky. Obviously, this could be another metaphor for good versus evil, but as you've probably guessed by now, Giant Robo doesn't make these things that simple. There are shots where our heroes are framed in shadow, while the antagonists are bathed in brilliant light, but the light and shadow motifs can't be tied to just the concepts of good and evil. There's also dark, troubled past, contrasted with bright yet uncertain futures. There's the theme of everyone being in the shadows, from Big Fire and IPO waging their secret war, to Daisaku feeling the weight of the shadow cast by the legacy of his father, the man who built Robo to begin with. And then there's Robo itself, an instrument of war with a dark color scheme, powered by nuclear energy, a power conceived from a dark past, especially for Japan. And yet, it is also called a beacon of hope. Once Daisaku begins to see Robo not as a weapon, but as a true partner, does he gain the ability to stop dwelling on his dark, troubled past that he associates with Robo, and begins to forge ahead to a bright future, even if that future is an uncertain one. And this to me is why I think Giant Robo can be called an epic anime. It doesn't just show us big, impactful fights between superpowered humans and giant robots, it also shows us how to tell a big, impactful story with big, impactful themes and ideas that can lead to having some of the most biggest and most impactful emotional moments I've seen in anime. The more I think about it, the gladder I am that Giant Robo exists. You don't always need a quiet, introspective anime to tell a great, complex story. Giant Robo is the story of hope, sacrifice, forgiveness, camaraderie in the face of death, the price of progress, but also its importance, the need to look forward to the future without forgetting the lessons of the past, but also not dwelling on the mistakes of the past, and building a better world for a future that you know you will never see. All of this in an anime that presents itself with such bombast, such grandeur, such immensity. An anime that has a scene like this in it. I guess sometimes when you have to tell a story this great and complex, bigger is better. Hey guys, just popping in at the end of this very long video to say thank you so much for supporting me over the past 2 years. The channel would be nowhere without you guys coming in and giving your support. For that, I am ever so grateful. Speaking of support, let me undercut that genuine heartfelt note of thanks with a plug for my Patreon. Patreon helps make both my job of running the channel and life in general so much easier. So by supporting the Patreon, you're not only helping me out, but you're also helping yourself. You'll get sneak previews to new episodes, get brand new episodes a day early, and even get your name immortalized in the end credits, which should be coming up in a few seconds. If you want to donate to the Patreon, just type in www.patreon.com/KaiserBeamz or click on the link in the description below. 2020 promises to be a big year for the channel. We not only have brand new Kyoto video episodes in the works, naturally, but also a brand new miniseries that's going to be launching next month. I should be launching a trailer for that sometime next week, so stay tuned for that. Once again, if you want to get on the ground floor to all these exciting new developments, please donate to the Patreon. Just type in www.patreon.com/KaiserBeamz or click on the link in the description below. Thanks for tuning in for 2 long years. Here's to 2020 and the brand new horizons for this channel.